By the late 4th century, the Roman Empire encompassed the entire Mediterranean, housing an estimated 50 to 60 million people. While administratively divided between East and West, it remained the most expansive and seemingly stable power in the world. The traditional explanation for its end focuses on a single external factor, the barbarian legend. This narrative suggests that Rome was a thriving civilization, suddenly murdered by violent waves of Germanic invaders. Archaeological records tell a more complicated story. In many regions, the gates were left wide open because the inhabitants had already left. Long before the invaders arrived, the cities had been abandoned by the very people responsible for running them. This bronze diploma represents the old Roman model of social cohesion. Citizenship was a status earned through decades of military service, binding the individual to the survival of the state through a shared civic identity. This shared identity began to dissolve as the Roman elite withdrew from the public sphere. They prioritized the protection of their private estates over the maintenance of the empire, hollowing out the state's resources from the inside. The Gini coefficient is a mathematical tool measuring social inequality. 0 represents perfectly equal wealth distribution, while 1 represents total concentration. Just before its collapse, Rome sat at a highly unequal 0.43. A mere 1% of the population controlled 16% of the empire's wealth. This wealth was effectively removed from the public pool. As a shrinking group of elites consolidated these resources, they simultaneously distanced themselves from the civic duties that had once funded the empire's infrastructure and defense. This invites a question about the viability of a superpower when its most influential citizens decide the public good is no longer a sound investment. Maintaining thousands of miles of border required a staggering military budget. By the year 400, the army represented roughly half of all imperial expenditure, demanding a constant flow of gold and manpower. To protect their profits, the elite used their influence to dodge taxes, shifting the entire financial burden onto small farmers. This broke the back of the Roman middle class, leaving them unable to sustain their own fields or contribute to the military. As the pool of citizen recruits dried up, the state turned to mercenaries. These soldiers were often recruited from the very tribes Rome was supposed to be guarding against, and their loyalty was tied to paychecks rather than the Roman state. Roman leadership maintained a fragile peace through direct golden payouts to foreign chiefs. Huge sums of these solidus coins were used as bribes to ensure security, a policy that relied entirely on the strength of a dwindling treasury. By prioritizing private profit over the public treasury, the Roman elite effectively defunded the army. They traded the long-term security of the empire for the short-term growth of their own estates. These ruins represent what was once the heart of Roman life, the shared public sphere. But as the elites withdrew their financial support, these urban centers began to deteriorate, signaling a broader retreat from civic society. Wealthy Romans engaged in a massive flight of capital to the countryside. They abandoned their positions in city governments to dodge taxes and protect their personal interests from the crumbling state. Archaeological evidence shows a spike in the construction of massive, fortified villas far from the cities. These were designed as self-sustaining compounds, using heavy masonry and high walls to physically exclude the public. This physical retreat into private bunkers signaled the end of a shared national identity. The elite no longer lived in the same world as the people they were to lead. Once the influential classes separated their survival from the survival of the people, the social fabric dissolved, making the final collapse inevitable. The barbarian migrations acted as a final catalyst for a society already weakened by its own economic and social policies. With the wealthy secured in their private domains, the poor were left with no reason to defend a state that offered only exploitation. For many, the central government had become a burden rather than a protector. Anthropologist Joseph Tainter has noted that for the average person, the collapse of a complex, top-heavy empire can actually be a rational preference. This chart compares archaeological data on human stature, which serves as a proxy for nutrition and health. The results for commoners in many regions show a surprising trend following the end of Roman rule. The data shows a measurable improvement in health and nutrition for the average person once the imperial tax burden was removed. The commoners were often better off when they no longer had to support a distant, unproductive elite. The fall of Rome was less of a military tragedy and more of a practical rejection of a failed social contract. The dissolution of the Western Empire suggests that an empire's survival ultimately depends on its people deciding that the state is worth saving.
Subscribe to our channel. Subscribe to our channel.